The Field of 68 Media Network presents Red is the New Orange, a Syracuse basketball podcast.
Vince intercepts a pass, breakaway for the freshman guard, he flies and slams! Aerial assault from Judah Mintz.
Looking to go back door to Bell, they get it to him near corner three, knocks it down! Chris Bell, the sharpshooter.
Bringing you everything you need to know out of the 315.
Up top, Williams surges ahead, up with the right hand and in. A pretty up and under move from Benny Williams to beat his man.
Over to Taylor, he skips into the lane, puts up a floater, and drops in.
Let's get it started with your hosts, Ian Unsworth and Johnny Gadamowicz.
We're taking a bit of a different tone today. Ian Unsworth, Johnny Gadamowicz here on Red is the New Orange, but we're looking up. Syracuse beats North Carolina in one of the most convincing games we've seen the Orange play this season. 86-79 the final in the Dome. Syracuse led for the entirety of the second half. Go figure. And the Orange got buckets when they needed to. Up next, this Saturday, Georgia Tech, a noon tip from McCamish Pavilion. We'll have Andrew Selliver on, Atlanta native, and he'll be down there for one of the many Syracuse student outlets on Saturday. But he knows a whole lot about the Yellow Jackets, close friends with the GT radio broadcaster Andy Dimitra. So we'll get the inside scoop on Georgia Tech and Damon Sotomayor's crew from Andrew in a bit. But first, Johnny, on Tuesday when this game started, I don't think you or I thought this would be anywhere close. In fact, I texted one of my UNC friends, if they lose by less than 20, I'll be happy. They did just that and plenty more.
They looked great, Ian. I wouldn't even just say win of the year. I think you can make the case it's the win of the past 4 or 5 years from a Syracuse standpoint. Certainly the first big win of the Red Autry era. And it was cool to watch. I mean, I speak for you and me both when I say that, you know, through our 4 years at SU, we didn't get a single top 10 win. To find the last top 10 win, you got to go, of course, to the win over Duke the year just prior to our arrival on campus. Just our luck. But that's besides the point. This isn't even really about this year so much. Like, there'll be plenty of time for us to have conversations of what does this do if the Orange win a couple. We'll cross that bridge when we get there. But if that's what you're thinking about,
they haven't won a couple yet.
They haven't done that yet. And if that's where your mind is going, you're missing the point. That win is not about this. This win is about setting the tone of what this program hopes it can achieve at its peak consistently. And I think you saw, as you were sort of alluding to, Ian, that Syracuse was the better team in pretty much just about every department. The only thing that you can really kind of tangibly point to was the rebounding battle where they were -8 on the glass. But outside of that, Syracuse looked better than a team that a lot of people nationally are picking to be playing in early April. And that has to be encouraging. That has to be exciting. And even if it doesn't amount to anything in the near future, give you hope and give you optimism for the years ahead.
Syracuse was shooting 70% from the field 7 minutes into the basketball game and was up 10 at one point in the first half. And after UNC made that inevitable run, Malik Brown got his second foul. Munir Hima came in and immediately looked lost. UNC came back, took the lead. I thought, oh no, here we go. This was a great start. It was probably fueled by the emotion of the crowd. The building was packed. It looked jumping. UNC took the lead 37-34 with 4 minutes to go before the first half ended. But instead of getting swept away, and without a stoppage from Red Autry, Syracuse got it together and made shots. Justin Taylor, of all people, made the game's next basket, and Syracuse just kept on chugging along. In the first half, it was the balanced scoring that got Syracuse in front, because it wasn't just Judah, it wasn't just JJ, even though their stat lines at the end of the game looked the best. There were 4 different players with 6 or more points going down the stretch of the first half. And that's what worked so well for Syracuse on offense. Everybody played a part and played their role, like we talked about at the beginning of the year, how these roles on this team are defined. When guys can go above and beyond and take that little extra step, you see how well things work.
Yeah, it was a mixed bag to say the least. Everybody did their job, so to speak. It shouldn't be lost in the shuffle and in the conversation either, Ian, that Judah and JJ, and you mentioned, yes, they have the two best final performances as far as the numbers go, let's call it, with 25 and 23 respectively. But I think the most important part of any sort of number that they contributed was the fact that they both played a full 40 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
And granted, they might kind of have to see the minutes increase a little bit now with the depth of this team being a little shot. Let's call it like it is.
Kyle Cuff also just isn't playing anymore.
Correct.
No reason why.
Not a part of the rotation at the moment. We'll see if it changes. But I think this is sort of, it gave Syracuse fans a sense of what they were promised when JJ Starling decided to transfer and come back to Central New York, right? Like this game, as great as it was, and it should not be lost and it should not be understated just how huge of a win this is. I think it leaves a lot of Syracuse fans saying, oh boy, what if, right? Like what if things came together and what if this was the version that we saw more consistently? Because the proof is in the pudding. Now we've seen that this team can go out there and beat a high quality conference opponent and go punch for punch with them and find a way to squeak out a victory when it matters most. You never want to be a pessimist in that regard, and you enjoy your victories when you get them. But that was a thought that I couldn't help having for myself. And you can only hope that we see more of this team over the course of the next month as they wrap up the regular season.
One thing that they kept coming back to on the broadcast, especially Jimmy Dykes, who's not an ACC guy at all. He does all SEC games. I don't know how they dropped him in to Syracuse to call this game with Doug Sherman, who's a
maybe Corey Alexander had didn't he get moved around earlier in the year when there was a snowstorm and he had trouble getting up there or something?
I'm not sure. I have no clue. But Jimmy Dykes was probably flying from Alabama or Tennessee or
that doesn't make a lot more logistical sense either.
Yeah. No clue how that happened. But as someone who's a true outsider to ACC basketball and doesn't spend a lot of time on it, he kept commenting on the youth of Syracuse's team and how sophomores are scoring 91% of Syracuse's points. We don't really think about it like that. We don't think of them as young because they've all spent so much time on the floor, at least this season, and most of them played the majority of last year for at least the bulk of games. But the emotional maturity piece is still getting there, especially with a first-year head coach. How good were the vibes on Tuesday? Not just in the arena, not just with the fans, but couldn't you see the entire team coming together? Couldn't you see Chris Bell going that extra mile to throw his shoulder into Armando Bacot just because Quadir Copeland was back there? Justin Taylor was back there. The bench was clapping for every single Syracuse rebound. A week and a half ago, Syracuse was getting absolutely ripped to shreds on the broadcast because no one on the bench was engaged. With this team, the emotional highs are so high, and the Colgate game. Think about where everyone was after that win, how the emotion just built. And this UNC game, you get out to this big lead, you hit the first two baskets of the second half, and emotions are running high. But if you go back 3 weeks ago and watch the other UNC game, it looks like everyone hates each other. No one's talking. All right, Judah's blaming everyone else for things. So you can just see that there are more steps to take to get from here to here and bring it back level. Because at the end of the day, you win in college basketball by getting old. And hopefully this team sticks around another year, continues to grow, and you get veterans that stay level-headed as things go up and down.
I think all the evidence you need to support your claim right there of this team having fun and those vibes being at an all-time high was during Red Autry's post-game press conference when mock reporter Quadir Copeland dropped in to ask him a quick question. And of course, the entirety of both the student media and the professional media there in the press conference room was having a field day with that on social media. But that's the kind of energy that this team reflects. And it's a really good point on your end, Ian, because you love to see it, and it is great from a vibe standpoint. But at a certain point, maybe it should raise a couple of eyebrows that this team has had so many peaks and valleys, and there hasn't been a ton of that middle ground, as you kind of mentioned. And some of that is just having a mixed bag, right? These guys not necessarily being super old, maybe we feel like they're older than they are because, as you mentioned, they've been around now for going on the better part of 2 years. But you would hope that if they run it back with the same cast of characters next year, which obviously there's a lot of time that has to pass between now and then before we have the answer to that question. But if this team brings back north of 75% of its scoring, which I could see a world where that happens, you can reflect on moments like this, and you can reflect on your lows as well, and put it all together and build and try to establish that sustainability that we hear about all the time.
What's the turning point for this season? Is this game the turning point? Does Syracuse continue to build on this? Well, I think the ACC tournament might be, again, the ACC tournament game last year, we were both there. It felt like a very strange end to a season that was on a downhill slide. Everyone, came together, played well, tried their butts off, and then lost. It just exploded. But this season is the ACC tournament a situation where even if one game is won, this team gets on that high and surprises a couple people. Again, the emotional swings can go just like baseball. In baseball, you can win 100 games, but if you're not hot in September, who the hell cares? You're out in the first round. Just ask the Dodgers. So those sort of emotional swings certainly happen over a basketball season, even though you're only playing 30 games. On the coaching side of things, I thought Adrian Autry outcoached Hubert Davis. It was the 2-3 zone. I mean, me especially, I have gone at the zone this year. I have not thought it's been effective. But Hubert Davis wasn't necessarily ready for it, and he put the wrong dudes in the middle. First Cadeau, then Harrison Ingram, and then Bacot. None of those three dudes are really meant to be there. I think if RJ Davis is in the middle of the zone, Syracuse probably gets shredded in the second half because Davis will shoot from anywhere. But instead,
right,
Cadeau isn't comfortable turning around and shooting that 12 to 15 footer, right? He'd rather get to his right hand to try to lay it in or pass. Bacot obviously has no clue what to do if he's outside of the restricted arc. And Ingram wants to spot up and shoot threes or drive. Like, that's not his game either. So I thought Davis just wasn't ready for as much zone as he saw.
It felt like it was one of those situations. It feels like a lot of the talk surrounding Elliot Cadeau this year has been, okay, this guy is as selfless as they come. This guy is what you want in a true point guard when it comes to distributing the basketball. And he still got his. I think he had 8 or 9 assists. But it almost felt like it was one of those games where his selflessness hurt him to an extent. Because there were times when Syracuse went to that zone in the second half and he was looking to make that extra pass or try to kick it outside to get it to a shooter, and it just wasn't there because Syracuse executed that 2-3 zone in the way that they were supposed to. And again, that's something that coming into this game, you wouldn't think the Orange would know how to pull off, right? And that's where I agree with you, Ian, and that I'll tip my cap to Red Autry, and that, yeah, you know what? He kind of did outcoach Hubert Davis in this game in that he didn't try to get too cute. He didn't back away from where he knows his team can execute. And even though the matchup was maybe a little bit daunting, he found areas to exploit it, and he did. And they did just that. And ultimately, if it's not for that 2-3 zone kind of wreaking the havoc that it did there in the second half, I don't know if Syracuse wins this game, right? Carolina easily could have came out and sort of replicated that run that they went on in the mid to late stages of the first half of, okay, we know where we can beat them when they're down kind of thing. That never happened because the Orange really kept the Tar Heels on their toes. And not just Red Autry, but the entirety of the coaching staff should be credited for that, particularly because, to our point earlier, this is a younger roster, right? It's not like these players are making a ton of adjustments on the fly based on experience. You would think a lot of those decisions sort of stem from the top down. So, yeah, I think the coaching staff deserves a lot of credit.
Yeah, and to go off that, last year, players were not making any adjustments at all.
No.
Every decision came from the top and trickled down. Syracuse had 10 steals. UNC turned it over 11 times.
It's becoming a strength. It's becoming a real
Syracuse
strength of this
was
team.
taking the ball.
Yeah.
UNC was not giving it away. And even though, Johnny, you came off the top and put that rebound number out there, that's the other reason the zone worked. Like, yes, they got out rebounded, but the effort was there, man. Like, Quadir Copeland, with 3 minutes to go, had his entire left arm wrapped around Armando Bacot's thigh, like he was trying to carry it like a football. And Copeland drove him from the right lane line out to the short corner, just boxing out. Even like Chris Bell's effort was the best I've seen it. And again, goes back to the fan support, goes back to the possibility of the stakes at hand. But these dudes really played their butts off and really knew where 5 in Carolina Blue was at all times and did their best to keep him off the glass. Yeah, he had 10 rebounds, but only 2 of them were on the offensive end. Ingram had 5, and most of those came in the first half when UNC made its run. So the defensive rebounding is that second part to the zone working. You got to close out and finish possessions. So that effort level, again, and it comes back to the emotion and the playing together and everyone being on the same page. The effort level makes the zone work. Last year, not only did people shoot over the zone, but they beat the zone by getting to the paint and out rebounding you on the offensive end. But the zone worked on Tuesday because everyone played their butts off. Any other thoughts, Johnny?
Well, I was just going to say maybe Syracuse needs more teams to beat them by 36 points in round 1 so that they can have that at the forefront of their memory and then give them a dish best served cold in round 2. I don't know, whatever the formula was, whatever the guys did the morning of Tuesday's game, but you got to try to replicate it because now these wins are going to become crucially that much more important down the home stretch.
Yeah, Georgia Tech has already knocked off UNC down at Atlanta, and for some reason this year, GT is protecting its home court really well. We'll step aside, let Rob Doster take the wheel for a second, then we'll be back with Andrew Selver to preview the Yellow Jackets.
As you guys know by now, we've partnered with BetMGM this season. We'll be using BetMGM lines to make all of our picks, and we'll have special offers for the listeners and the viewers of the Field of 68 as we all get ready for the best month of the year, March Madness. If you haven't signed up for BetMGM yet, you can use the bonus code FIELD150 and you will get $150 in free bets on your first wager with BetMGM, regardless of whether or not you win that first bet. Here's the best part. All you need to do is deposit and bet $5 of your hard-earned money. This is how you make it work. Download the BetMGM app and sign up using the bonus code FIELD150. That's FIELD150. Deposit at least $5 and place your first wager on any game. You will receive up to $150 in bonus bets regardless of the outcome of your bet. Just make sure you use that bonus code FIELD150 when you sign up. And remember, BetMGM is now available in one wallet in select states. As a New Jersey resident, this is super convenient when I have to go cover games in Philly or New York, which happens quite a bit. When you cross state borders, you just log into your existing account and fire away. You don't have to create a new account in each state. It's easy, it's simple, and it's clean. And most importantly, we have some fun stuff coming up for the conference tournaments and for the NCAA tournament. Bet insurance tokens, college hoops odds boost, and my personal favorite, a nice little parlay boost here and there. So download the BetMGM app and sign up today. Big news, guys. I am thrilled to announce that we have partnered with Autograph, a company founded by the GOAT himself, Tom Brady. The Autograph fandom app gives you access to the best college hoops content, fan contests, and exclusive rewards like discounted tickets, all for doing the things that diehard fans like you already do, following your favorite team in the news and listening to podcasts just like this one. When Tom, and yes, I am calling him Tom, we're on a first name basis these days, co-founded Autograph, he had one mission in mind: change the fan experience for the better. It works like this: you get all of your college hoops content you want in one place. You get articles from your favorite writers, pods from your favorite hosts, contests from your favorite creators, all on the feeds and the sites that you already enjoy. But instead of having to go to all these different places, it all comes to you in one spot, the Autograph fandom app. But here's the best part: the more content that you consume, the higher you rank in the app. As you consider to level up in status on the app, you can unlock unique rewards curated exclusively for you. So download the free Autograph app in the App Store and use the referral code F68, that's F68, or tap in at the link in the description below or in the podcast app of your choosing to start earning points for doing something as normal as listening to this very podcast.
All right. In 3, 2. We're back to talk Georgia Tech with everyone's favorite Syracuse student from the Peach State, Ian Unsworth, Johnny Gadamwich, joined by WAER staff member, former Z89 sports director at this point, and just a man of many hats, Andrew Sulliver from Atlanta. He's very deep into Georgia Tech with Andy Demetra, who is Georgia Tech's radio broadcaster, two are close friends. So Andrew keeps close ties on the Yellow Jackets, much closer ties than we do. So we figured we'd bring him on.
Hey guys, how are you?
Doing well. Can't complain. How is Z89 doing these days?
Z89's good. Got a good women's basketball team to cover. So that's always exciting.
I see this women's lacrosse team is hurt again already, and the season hasn't even started yet.
Yeah, they'll be okay. I mean, three-goal loss to the reigning champs on the road to start the year. They're pretty good as well. Women's basketball's 21-4 now, I think. So, I mean, they're fringe hosting NCAA tournament games.
How about
right now,
Felicia Leggett-Jack? The Syracuse women's team is legit. Only year 2 for her, and already they're thinking about hosting tournament games. It's really impressive what she's done and turned the program around.
Yeah, I mean, a massive turnaround. I was at the Louisville game last week when they won at the buzzer on 2 free throws, and she celebrates on the court after every win with the fans, and then she goes running up the tunnel and gives athletic director John Wildhack a huge hug. So, I mean, it's about the wins, and it's also about kind of the environment that she creates, and everybody wants to be a part of it right now.
Speaking of winning with questionable free throws, Georgia Tech beat North Carolina on January 30th, 74-73. That was the Yellow Jackets' last ACC win, and also their only ACC win in the past month.
Mm-hmm.
This team is in free fall, just like Syracuse pick up a huge momentum win at home after struggling through the first parts of 2024. But GT just can't get it together.
Yeah, they've struggled, but if you look at their wins in the ACC, it says Duke, North Carolina, and Clemson, the 3 best teams in the conference. So it's interesting. I think those free throws were a little more legitimate than Syracuse women's basketball's free throws this past week, probably. They're so young, though. Young, inexperienced, new head coach. And so I think you don't want to let the record fool you, because they're talented enough to beat anybody in the ACC, and they've proved that, right? If you can win at Clemson and you can beat Duke and Carolina on your home floor, then you can beat anybody in the ACC. I think the problem right now, though, is they're really showing that they can't get things done in stretch time and crunch time because they are so inexperienced. And your go-to guy is probably Nathan George, who's a freshman. That doesn't win you a lot of games in ACC play.
1-7 over their last 8. And you look at some of these recent results, Andrew, and some of them not particularly close. I mean, you lose by double digits to Louisville. You get absolutely dog-walked by Wake Forest. The Virginia Tech game, not particularly close. So as much as these impressive wins have stood out, there have been some games where it looks like this team is kind of far away to getting to that end result and that finished product. What's the vibe surrounding this team right now in terms of, okay, look, yeah, they have those big wins, but some of these other games against middle of the road conference opponents, it hasn't even really been close.
Yeah, I mean, when you talk about what Georgia Tech fans are thinking, it's not, there wasn't really a huge expectation that Damon Stoudemire would come in after Josh Pastner with all these young guns and just win immediately, right? I don't think maybe there was a hope. There couldn't be an expectation that Georgia Tech would be an NCAA tournament team this year. I mean, you'd be really fortunate to think they would be a tournament team next year, right? You're talking about a program that's made it to the NCAA tournament once in a decade. And that was, when you piece together all of your best players that happen to be veteran upperclassmen, and went and won an ACC tournament. But there's really been no stretch of success in the last decade and a half for Georgia Tech basketball. So I don't know that it's panic right now. I mean, you knew you were going to have some growing pains, especially when you hire who you did, right? When you go to the NBA and hire Damon Stoudemire, that's going to be an adjustment. It's a lot different than what Syracuse did in hiring in-house. So it's kind of a wait and see game, right? If you finish with 3 ACC wins this year, that's no different than finishing with 7 ACC wins this year, right? You were never going to make the NCAA tournament, and it's all about how well you can be prepared for next year, right? You got to make sure you keep your young players that are talented. You can't lose them to the transfer portal, and recruit. And that's something that Georgia Tech hasn't done well as of late, is recruit. And it's, concerning given where the, team is located. There's a plethora of talent in football, in basketball, in baseball, all within a 30-mile radius of campus. And recruiting has been a massive issue for both the football and the basketball team in the last decade. Seems like they're starting to figure it out on the football side, but, we'll see what Damon Stoudemire can do on that end.
Before we hop in and talk matchups, I want to follow up on something you mentioned there as far as Josh Pastner, because obviously they make the switch this past offseason, and Pastner has gone on and seems to be doing just fine for himself in our
he's
world,
great on TV.
in the media sphere. But I want to ask you, Andrew, I remember, I think back even to the Syracuse game at Georgia Tech that I covered last year, and it was a big Syracuse win, a Joe Girard explosion. But I remember sitting in and listening to Josh Pastner's post-game press conference, and he really took accountability. And he gave me the impression of a coach that really kind of gets it. Even if the results aren't there, he had his head screwed on the right way, and he was, you could tell that his heart and his head were both in the right place. When that move went down this past offseason, I know we're rewinding a little bit here, but were a lot of fans up in arms? I mean, I know obviously the results kind of weren't there and he didn't have the resume and track record to show for it, but that felt like a move that was a little bit of an eyebrow raiser, at least for me.
Right. I mean, when you question it, right, you do have to look at the results to some extent. And you think about, what did he do at Georgia Tech? And, he was here for 7 years, I think, and made one NCAA tournament, made it to the NIT once, right? Like, if you're missing the NIT 5 of 7 years, right, like, that's beyond not great. It's not good at all. And so I think that there was a lot of respect for what he did, because of, what you talked about, and that passion, and, he clearly cared for the players and put his all into the job. And to some extent, that's what you can ask for out of a coach, but at the same time, you got to win, right? And I don't think Georgia Tech's asking to go to the Elite Eight every year, but I think they're asking to go to March Madness 50% of your years that you're here once you build up the program. And, you can give them your first 3 years free, but when you go to the NCAA tournament, one of your next 4, then that's probably not good enough to keep a job. That's the reality of college basketball, of college athletics at a program like Georgia Tech. not a national power, but still a team that expects to compete year in and year out. But, it was fun while it lasted, right? You got the memes of, Pastner and his sideburns and his COVID, not even his mask, his COVID shield that he used to wear. And he's running up and down and flashing his pieces of paper from the scorer's table, telling the team what defense to run. He was different. He was unique. He was, entertaining. And at first, it was a lot of fun to watch. And when they made the NCAA tournament, it was awesome. And then it kind of all took a tumble after that, where like, how much fun really is it to watch that when your team's not winning, right? You can't get away with that when you're losing all these games. And so I don't think anybody was shocked. I don't think anybody was, outraged that the move happened. I think there was a lot of love for him and, for, like you said, that love and care that he put into the place. But at the same time, winning keeps you a job.
So now Josh Pastner's gone. Johnny Gadamwich just used the word dog walked, which took me about 5 minutes to get over. And we're talking Georgia Tech with Andrew Sulliver, who's down in Atlanta right now, will be at the game tomorrow. It's a 5:30 CW Network special, by the way, folks.
Oh, yeah.
So
shout out the CW.
Yeah, gear up for that. Public service, public access television at its finest. Let's get into the matchup here. Georgia Tech is a young team, Andrew. You brought that up already, and not good at keeping care of the basketball. Syracuse is the best in forcing turnovers. They got UNC to give it up 10 times. What do you think Syracuse can do defensively to get in Georgia Tech's way?
Yeah, I'm curious to see how this one matches up. By the way, both teams were dog walked by Wake Forest.
That's true.
Let's not forget that. Syracuse played a lot of 2-3 zone against North Carolina, and I'm interested to see if they return to that, because I think part of the reason, obviously, they don't have a ton of players available, scholarship players available, and part of it's, the foul concern. I think another part of it was, athleticism. North Carolina's freaky athletic and, a tough matchup for Syracuse. And I wouldn't say Georgia Tech's quite as tough of a matchup. You don't have a Bacot down low at the 5 that creates matchup problems for Malik Brown as much. But Georgia Tech is still one of the most athletic teams in the conference. So I'd be curious to see if, they try and go to that 2-3 zone a lot more tomorrow again, because they want to stay out of foul trouble, and they, know that some of the matchups in terms of athleticism favor the Yellow Jackets. Plus, Georgia Tech shoots the ball 32% from 3, right? That's not going to kill you theoretically. Now they've had a couple of games where, you might want to be ready to switch out of that 2-3 zone. They shot 50% from deep at Cameron and almost beat Duke for a second time this year. But I would not be surprised to see a healthy percentage of zone tomorrow.
Johnny, are you getting flashbacks to last year in the Dome?
To say the least.
Yeah, I mean, that's just the all-time horror matchup if we flash it back. Talk about 3-point shooting over the zone from a team that doesn't shoot the three-pointer well.
Exactly.
Andrew, you look up and down this Georgia Tech roster, and me and Ian were talking about it before we hopped on the air here. Really the only names, and granted, of course, this is the first time Syracuse and Georgia Tech are playing this year, and it is also indeed the only time they will play in the regular season. But the only names that really jumped off the page to me as far as guys I recognize were Miles Kelly and Debo Coleman. I want to ask you this. Kyle Sturdivant as well. You can throw in that conversation.
You're not going to forget a dude nicknamed Debo. Just
Correct.
Right.
The question is, though, Andrew, of all these new guys, whether it be transfers, whether it be freshmen, who's the one that can have the biggest impact on the game against the Orange tomorrow? And how does he do that? And how does that player execute said game plan?
Right. I mean, you talk about 3 typical starters on this team, and Bai Dongo, Kawasi Reeves, and Nathan George, all 3 guys that, have at times shown flashes that they can take over a game. Dongo will play a lot down low and he's not a huge guy, but he's really athletic, right? He's more athletic than Malik Brown. He'll be quicker than Malik Brown. So that's a guy that, he can get up and dunk all over you. He can, beat you up and down the court. So that's one to watch. Nathan George at the point guard spot. He can shoot it if he's hot from anywhere. That'll be a really fun matchup if they do play man, to see he and Mintz go up against each other. Those are two guys. I mean, Miles Kelly is still kind of the go-to guy if they really need a bucket, usually. But it's the kind of thing where most nights this team doesn't have, everybody clicking on all cylinders. The record can probably hint at that fact. It's, if they want to win, they need three guys to actually play really well, and they don't get that a lot. Partially because we're seeing a team that's got its growing pains, like we talked about. Debo Coleman, we'll see if he plays. He's been out for the last 2 games. I believe it's just a minor injury, so you would expect that he's probably back for tomorrow's game, but we'll see. But it's been interesting, right? You talk about Debo Coleman and Kyle Sturtevant. Those were guys that were starting under Josh Pastner, and they've stuck around, and they're not starting this year, and they're playing, around 20 minutes a game, which is a little down for those guys. So there's plenty of depth on this team, but there's, you're talking about experienced guys that aren't quite as talented, don't have quite the upside, and then really inexperienced guys that have a lot to learn in the conference.
That's got to make for a weird locker room, too, you would think, to have a new coach come in and these regulars now stepping into those reserve-type roles. I'm sure it's a little bit of an awkward situation at McCamish.
Yeah, everything I've heard has sounded pretty good on that front. You would expect that, right, when you hear the front line of that. I haven't heard a ton about Debo Coleman, but I have heard a lot about, Kyle Sturtevant being a guy that everybody loves and respects, and playing a different role this year, but playing it well and being a true leader on this team off the bench. So I think that could have been cause for concern at the start of the year. Doesn't seem like that's been a real problem for them.
Speaking of weird things in McCamish, Andrew, last question before we wrap it up. I went down there last year, and it was a Saturday game. Place seemed like a ghost town. I think they had maybe had something the night before, but either way, the arena was empty. What's the fan support looking like this year? Have there been more bodies at these games, or is it same old, same old?
No, I mean, I'm trying to think back when they built McCamish, probably 8 years ago, maybe. And it's a really nice place, right? Like I thought
it was a fantastic arena.
Yeah,
it wasn't facility wise and everything. It was nice.
Right. Like if you had that arena at Syracuse, it'd be awesome, right? You shrink it down, you pack the place every night. It's going rocking. It's a really cool spot, but they never fill it. And part of that is, the student support at Georgia Tech, partially, it's a big engineering school, not a ton of, school athletic spirit. So there's, not a huge fan base with the students. So that's problem number one, that they'll never have that. And Georgia Tech fans aren't the most loyal, supportive fans, right? If you're winning, then they'll start to show up. You saw it a little bit with football this year. I was here for the Syracuse-Georgia Tech football game, which was one of the best crowds Georgia Tech football, other than the Georgia Tech game where it's 60% Georgia fans in Atlanta. One of the best crowds they've had, because the football team started to win and they started to see what was turning around there. There's no real promise to get people out for this game. It's more about the matchup, and Syracuse isn't good enough to draw a ton of fans. Right when North Carolina was here, they got a decent crowd and they stormed the court after they beat the Tar Heels. But Syracuse will draw some fans out, not a ton. It will not be remotely close to packed, which is a shame. But that's kind of what you get with a school in Midtown Atlanta that doesn't have a great team.
It sounds like we can call McCamish Pavilion the Barclays Center of the ACC if we were to make an NBA comp there. Very nice and shiny and new, just can't fill the place.
Exactly.
I saw more Auburn flags than I saw Georgia Tech flags when we were down there last year. So
and Auburn wasn't playing.
Yeah, that's got to tell you something. Andrew Sulliver, thanks for hopping on with us. Make sure to check out his work and stay locked on WAER. He'll have the call of the season finale against Clemson. So looking forward to that. Andrew, again, thanks for your time.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
That'll wrap us up here on Red is the New Orange. Syracuse and Georgia Tech tipping off tomorrow at 5:30 on the CW. Johnny and I will be back Monday for the recap. Enjoy your weekend. Go Orange.